Some say it's like looking into the light. Some say it's a flashback or a recap of your entire life. What is it? Do we know? Will we ever know? Today, we learn more about near-death experiences. Thanks for listening and subscribing to Learning More. This week, we are talking about near-death experiences. What exactly is this? And is this phenomena something that a lot of people have experienced? And perhaps maybe they don't want to come forth with this because, well, quite frankly, maybe people will think that they're making it up. Today, I am talking to somebody that actually had a near-death experience, and we're going to hear about that and how it changed his outlook on life. I'm joined by Joseph Geraci. He wrote a book called Eternity Revisited: Messages on Life from My Near-Death Experience. Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today to share your experience with us.
Welcome.
So, okay, right there in the open, we talked about, I mentioned that perhaps many people have experienced this, but they don't want to come forth with this. Was that difficult for you to come forth and start to talk to people about this?
Yes, it was, because it was kind of a two-step process. When it first happened, I had never heard of a near-death experience. Mm-hmm. I had no idea about what it was. I thought that would happen. It only happened to me. I didn't think it happened to anybody else. And
right.
The term near-death experience was not in my vocabulary. And I did not want to share it. It was a very personal thing, a very spiritual experience that I just wanted to keep to myself, and there was no need to share it. Over time, the feeling inside, just welled up that I had to share it. It was just, I was going to explode if I didn't tell somebody. And Of course, the closest one to me was my wife. And yes, there's that danger of finally getting to talk about it. Basically, they're going to think you're crazy.
Right. Yeah.
You've lost it. And I found out later that actually happened to a lot of people. After I did share it and I heard about the near-death experience, I found out I wasn't the only one.
You first talked to your wife about this. What was that conversation like? How did that go?
It was a very emotional experience because I was taking a chance.
Yeah.
Didn't know what she would think about it or think about me.
Right.
Having and she was a nurse, and she actually was very interested and very supportive and really encouraged me to talk about it and share it. And, she took ownership with me, and that was very, very helpful for me.
This actually, there's been a lot of divorce after a near-death experience, right? Where people suddenly feel like they're married to a different person.
They are, definitely are.
It's
not the same person. And usually it's a different value system. You marry someone or you're with someone because you have a lot in common and you share something. And if that one person changes, it takes a lot to adjust, to get back together, get a common ground again. And it doesn't happen in a lot of people. I was very, very fortunate that my wife was supportive. She has since passed away. Now, in my twilight years, and I just feel the responsibility to share what I know and what I experienced, and if it helps someone, if it benefits anybody, then that's fine. I just felt guilty if I go to the grave and not share what I've been privileged to experience.
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, you said you went through this and you had never heard of a near death experience or didn't know or thought you were the only one. I think it's
Well,
always nice when you are that person that experiences it to be able to share that information. So it's awesome that you're able to do that, because I know it's difficult to share that type of personal experience with so many people.
it's one of the most frustrating things for me is when someone says, describe it. You know,
Right.
can't describe it. You know, it's totally beyond anything that I can draw
Well, and
reference to.
yeah, and that's kind of, one of those things that, and I won't ask you to describe it, but some people, like when, like the general public, when we hear about something like this, right? We hear about, like, walking towards the light, or seeing like a recap of your life, right? A best of reel at the end. Uh, is it anything like that?
Well, I,
Or is
for
that just
some,
Hollywood?
no, no, for many people that have had the experience, they do recount those things,
Hmm.
seeing relatives or uh, going through a tunnel. I mean, there are a number of accounts of the experience. Mine was very boring. There was nothing glamorous about it. I felt that I was going to die, and I knew I was going to die. Uh, and I just became totally immersed into this bright light that everybody talks about. All right,
Hmm.
the peace, the love. I didn't I didn't see things or hear things. Those are all biological terms, and this is strictly a non-biological experience. That's why you can't explain it. You say, "What did you see? What did you hear? What happened next?" That's only relevant to here. I mean, there was no next. There was no such
Hmm.
thing as time. Um, Everything was all at once, and even me describing it now in these terms doesn't do it.
Yeah.
It falls short. It's a. I often say, if you really want to experience what I experienced, you'd have to crawl into my head and get into the emotions of,
Right.
of what happened. My
Hmm.
words aren't going to do it.
You just said that you felt like you were going to die. How long before did you feel like you were going to die?
Almost immediately. Uh, I was home post-op from surgery, and the sutures are so kind of dissolve, so you don't have to have them removed. Well, they
Hmm.
dissolved before the wound healed,
Mm.
and I hemorrhaged. And my wife, being a nurse, got me to the hospital, and I was in the emergency room, and uh, I could feel myself going. I lost a tremendous amount of blood. There was blood all over the place, and I could just feel myself going. And they didn't really believe me, I don't think, in the ER, and they put me on 15-minute vital signs. It was
Mm.
shortly after they did that and walked out that I felt myself going. And fortunately, my wife was there. She took my pulse. There wasn't any, respiration stopped. They called what they call a quick, and everybody came running in and working on me to bring me back. So to answer your question directly, uh, it all happened within seconds, a minute, that I felt myself going. I knew I was going to die. And the fear, the pain that I was in just left me. I just felt very at peace. And uh, I knew that my family was going to be okay. I had two small children. I knew my wife would be okay. And I just turned to her and said, "Joan, I'm going to die." And that's when I went home.
I can't even imagine her reaction to hearing that and then seeing what happened. So, for 4 to 5 minutes, you were clinically dead, and they brought you back. Some people say skeptics will say that it's because of the medication, it's because of something that's going on. But in this particular case, you had already had the operation, you were at home, you weren't under any medication. You were rushed back to the hospital, and upon arrival, that's when this happened. So you can't help but see the mystery in this, see, like, is this something that's just beyond our understanding that maybe someday we will understand? I mean, someday maybe this will be taught in schools.
Yes, it already has, actually. One of the courses I taught in the psychology department was death and dying. And although it dealt with cultural aspects of death, the different cultures, how they treat death, and some celebrate, some mourn, but right at the end of the textbook was a little chapter on the near-death experience. And I was surprised to see that,
Right.
But it gave it lip service for about 3 paragraphs. Of course, I filled in the rest.
Right.
Being discussed more now in different terms. Initially it was the glamorous description of the near-death experience, the light, and now I think with the advancement of science and the different levels of consciousness that we're beginning to find out, that there's more to it than just the theatrical part of it, if you will. That there is some science involved. I maintain there's a lot of science involved, especially with the different levels of consciousness that we're beginning to understand. And I think the more we learn and the more we advance ourselves in the fields of science, the more credibility this phenomenon is going to get. So I welcome the critics. I welcome the challenge that they have for the experience, and because that's going to only further the knowledge. Right? If you don't challenge something, you're not going to learn anything from it. So I welcome that. And there are skeptics. I have some physician friends of mine who are convinced you're dead. That's it.
Right.
The end. Right. But one of the things that this taught me was almost anything's possible. You can't close your mind to different possibilities. There's just so much out there. One of the messages, not like it was written down to me, but that I was left with the experience, is that I had at that point total knowledge. Now that sounds kind of arrogant, but during that experience, I felt total knowledge. I knew everything. It was there. And oddly enough, being an old science teacher, I was a fan of Einstein and his theories. I love to dabble with what his theories are. And one of the first things that came to my mind when I woke up from this experience was of Albert Einstein and how little he knew. Now, why on God green earth, of all things that I could have thought about, was that? Right. And I almost chuckled to myself. Wow.
Yeah.
Other things that I was left with, the importance of a sense of humor. That is so important in life. And the basic message is just simply to love and to care. Nothing really else matters. If you have that, it's a total positive thing. The negativity that we experience wouldn't exist. It is real. We just haven't figured out how to prove it or describe it yet.
Right.
But I believe the same science that is trying to disprove it is going to be the same science to prove it, that there is another dimension out there, that there is another level of consciousness, that we don't just disappear when we die. There is an essence that we have. Things that our senses that we can touch, feel, smell, those are all tangible things. Well, so is love and peace. Those are tangible things. The essence of who we are real things. We can't see them, we can't touch them, but they're there and they stay there. You have memories of people that you love that passed. Right? Why do you still have that emotion and feeling? If it wasn't real, you wouldn't have it. But then I get going on
it. Well, okay. So you mentioned earlier that you were a different person after your near-death experience. Tell us about life after near-death experience.
Yeah, I was a different person inside, and that's the frustrating part. Because if you look at me on the outside, I'm still the same person. You take a picture of me then, take a picture of me now, outside of 80 years later, it's still the same person. But what percolates inside is different. How I view things is different. People will say, well, gee, you had that experience and you're blah, 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 kumbaya, and yet you said that or you did that. That's not right. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm human. Forgive me. But and that's a frustrating part. Someone expects something different from you, and they should. But what you think and the reasons of what you do, they're different.
What was interesting, I watched your TEDx talk on YouTube, and I'll put a link to that in the description for others to go check out. But you just mentioned humor. You also mentioned that, like, after the near-death experience, you kind of just didn't care as much about your appearance. You didn't care very much about, like, that drive, to succeed in the corporate world, like that type of feeling. Is that still there, or has that changed? Like, how do you feel about those things now?
That morphed. That initially, yes, I could care less with. I was in education administration, and I wanted to be superintendent of schools and go to the head of the class. And that didn't have the same value to me anymore. It wasn't important. Over time, to survive, feed myself and my family, and I adjusted and I still functioned in a 9-to-5 world.
And why do you think that change happened for you?
It has to do with the purity of the experience, the thing that matters most. Just loving. I know that word is so overworked, but it's true. And having peace. Everything else just took a back seat. It was like I gave up part of my human existence for a time in that experience. I wanted to hold on to that feeling of perfection. I didn't want to lose it. But when you're immersed in life, you're gonna gravitate to a survival mode again. So
yeah. So do you fear death?
do I fear death?
Yeah.
Do I fear death? No. There's a 2-part answer to that question. Usually people say, do you fear dying? And I say, yes. I do. So you reversed it on me. Yes, I fear dying. That's a process, and that could be painful. No, I know I watched my wife suffer with cancer for over a year, and that was painful. And I would fear that. Death itself, no. It's getting over the hump that's the hard part.
If and I'm sure you've met and talked with plenty of people that have had near-death experience, but you did your dissertation on children that have had near-death experience. Can you tell us a little about that?
First of all, if you read my book, children are special in my life. I mean, and I say it, if I have to personify the near-death experience, it would be in the eyes of a child. There's the innocence and purity of life right there, before it's been corrupted and contaminated with everything around it. The people that I interviewed, research for my dissertation, were adults when I interviewed them, and they had their experience when they were children, because I wanted them to be able to articulate as best they can what it was like as a child. Because if you ask a child, they're limited, as to how they can express themselves. And their experiences are not unlike any adult experience. They all come back with the same thing. Everyone has that common, sense of love and peace.
How if somebody's experienced this and, they're listening to this podcast, what advice do you have to them about sharing their experience?
Well, there are support groups for people who've had the experience. The most prominent support group is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANS. They have chapters all over the world. People can just, they don't have to take an active part. They can do their research with this organization. They go to a support group if they wish. I wouldn't force anyone to share it or see it. It's up to the individual. If they want to share it, there's a place to share it. I think you'll find that most anyone that had that experience is not interested in advertising or not interested in converting anybody to, I'd be the last one to say that. I share it because I'm asked to share it. I'm not going to go knocking on the doors and, oh, hey, what happened to me? That kind of thing. It's, if you want to know, I'll tell you. All right. If you want to buy the book, buy the book. If you don't want to buy the book, don't buy the book. All right? I don't care. I'm not going to make a fortune on that, that's for sure. It's a personal thing, and it should remain a personal thing.
Well, Joe, I thank you so much for sharing this with us today. It's one of those topics that I've always wanted to learn more about. So I really appreciate learning from somebody that's actually experienced a near-death experience. So thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for asking.
And thank you for listening and subscribing to Learning More. We encourage you, and thank you for rating this podcast and sharing it with your friends. As with any podcast that gives medical or legal opinion, the information is not meant to substitute professional advice, and we encourage you to consult a professional to discuss your exact needs. I invite you to check out our daily podcast that I host called This Is Today, where you will learn the story of each day, including national events, daily history, featured podcast of the day, and so much more. Some fun stories over there on This Is Today. It's available wherever you get your podcast, and there is a link in the description of this podcast. On the next Learning More, we are going to talk with Harry Glorikian. He is going to talk to us about artificial intelligence and the future you. Yeah, this one's pretty cool. You got to check it out. It's coming out next week. And if you have something that you would love to learn more about, please let us know, and it just may become a future episode. Submit your ideas and comments at learningmorepodcast.com. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. I'm Russ, and I look forward to learning more with you next time.